And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on Tuesday, September 16th, 2025. And starting with the state of the sea ice in the far north, we have generally open water all along the Chukchi Sea and in through the Beaufort Sea coastline. There is some early season ice forming way north of the coast. You got to be out over the Arctic Ocean about 500 miles away. So first early season ice will not be really taking shape until sometime in early October. And looking at the satellite imagery on this Tuesday afternoon, we have another low pressure coming out of the North Pacific up into the eastern Gulf. This is a storm force low. There are gale and storm warnings around this system, especially over the eastern part of the Gulf. We're expecting southeast storm force winds as high as 50-55 knots as you get just offshore of the outer coast of the Panhandle. Meanwhile, back further west, there's a low sitting out here to the northwest of Shimmy in the lower southwest corner of the Bering Sea. That energy will be sliding southeastward with time through mid and late week. And then up along areas of the interior, beautiful day along the Alaska Range with clear skies. Same thing up here along areas of the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound, the west part there of the Brooks Range up toward Red Dog Mine. And areas that do have some clearing tonight will likely see temperatures getting down near or even below freezing. But otherwise, this is the main active weather maker with the gale to storm force winds and moderate to heavy rain that'll be pushing along the outer Panhandle coast up toward and into the Yakutat area as we go through tonight and Wednesday. So on Wednesday, the low is expected to pull from down here back toward outside of Yakutat Bay and southeast of Cape Suckling. It's a compact low, has a pretty strong pressure gradient in a short distance. That's why we have these storm force winds along the northern and northeastern quadrant of the low. And there will be some moderate to heavy rainfall. 2 to 4 inches of rain could fall from around Sitka on up along to Yakutat. Meanwhile, further west, here's the low out here in the southwestern Bering and western Aleutians. That'll begin to weaken. Some of that energy sliding southeastward. All of it's going to eventually consolidate and push back up into the Gulf for the weekend. Here's a secondary low taking shape along that frontal boundary. And as we get into Thursday afternoon, we find the one low that was here kind of washes out, and then that secondary low is going to take over. This one will also in time begin to try to shift some of that energy out into the Gulf over the weekend. We're going to have yet another low come up out of the North Pacific, a wet, windy low, kind of like the one impacting the Panhandle now. That'll come up on Monday into early Tuesday. So a very active pattern will continue along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle, especially from areas around Cape Suckling on in through the outer Panhandle coast. So this is the wind and marine situation here for Wednesday. Interchannel south winds 30-35 knots, gust 45-50 knots. Stevens Passage up through Lynn Canal, we could see waves building as high as 6-8 feet there. We have 8-foot waves around Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Outer coast off of Craig, Prince of Wales Island, 35 knot south winds, but the strongest winds right near the front and the core of this low will be right along and just off the coast in through the near shore and open waters of the eastern and northeastern Gulf. South to southeast storm force winds of 50-50 knots, turning northeasterly at 45 knots out of Yakutat Bay, and waves building upwards of 20 to even over 25 feet. And then on Thursday, we have southeast winds, 20 knots interchannels, maybe still some gusts to 35-knot gales. Stevens Passage up through Lynn Canal with waves running 4 feet. Outer coast, southeast winds, Sitka down through Craig at 30 knots. Easterly out of Cross Sound and Yakutat, Cape Suckling, 30-knot east winds and waves running generally around 12 feet. Now for the northwestern Gulf, not quite as rough because we have north winds in Prince William Sound at 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Outside of Hinchinbrook entrance to Kayak Island, north winds 15 to 20 knots. Through Cook Inlet, kind of a mixed bag of winds, upper Cook Inlet around Anchorage, Turnagain Arm, but as we come down through Anchor Point and out of Kamishak Bay, Homer Spit, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet. On Thursday, winds will pick up outside of Hinchinbrook entrance out of the east-southeast at 30 knots with waves building to 7 to 9 feet. Off the eastern Kenai coast, east winds 25 knots. And then the length of Cook Inlet, upper Cook Inlet, 10-knot winds, waves 2-3 feet up toward Anchorage and Turnagain Arm. But as we come on down, again, past Kenai and Anchor Point, northeast winds 15 knots, waves 3-4 feet. And then finally, Kamishak Bay, northeast winds to 25 knots with waves 5 to 6 feet. Around Kodiak Island on Wednesday, winds will be westerly at 15 knots, waves generally 4 to maybe 6 feet there on the east side of the island. Otherwise, variable winds generally around 10 knots, much of the Alaska Peninsula, except for more easterly off of Sandpoint and False Pass at 15 knots. Waves running maybe as much as 3 to 6 feet, Sandpoint to False Pass, but up from Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay, waves only a foot or two. And then on Thursday, we have east winds 20 knots, Shelikof Strait, 4 or 5 foot waves. Southeast winds 15 knots, 6-7 foot waves off of Kodiak Island. 25 knot southeast winds with 5 foot waves east of Chiknik. And then as we drop on down along the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula, east winds of 20 knots, 2 foot waves variable as you're north of Cold Bay, becoming southwesterly with waves there 3 to 4 feet. The Aleutians on Wednesday, variable winds 10 knots, eastern Aleutians around Dutch Harbor on Alaska, south winds Nikolsky through Atka Adak at around 15 to 20 knots. And they pick up a bit because there is that weakening low circulation. So near and south and west of Kiska, 30 knot west to southwest winds. For Thursday, winds become west-southwest around Unalaska, 15 to 20 knots, and generally westerly extending Nikolsky through Atka Adak before turning northwesterly, 15 knots there, northwest there of Adak up through Kiska and Shemya. Now for the southwest coast, Wednesday, variable winds 10 knots within Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, waves only a foot or two. The Pribilovs and St. Matthew, northeast to east winds 15 knots, waves maybe running around 5-6 feet. St. Paul, St. George, as we go up along the lower Yukon coast and out of Norton Sound, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots and waves 2 to 3 feet. For Thursday, winds are going to be largely offshore here. We have 20 knot winds within Bristol Bay, 20 knot winds within Kuskokwim Bay, waves around a few feet. And then along the lower Yukon coast and out of Norton Sound, easterly winds to 10 knots with 2 foot waves. And then St. Matthew through St. Paul and St. George, northeast winds on Thursday at 15 to 20 knots and waves 5 to 7 feet. And then coming through north side of St. Lawrence Island, the west side of the Seward Peninsula, Wales, Port Clarence, north winds 15 to 20 knots on on Wednesday. And then as we round the Lisburn Peninsula, winds could locally be as high as 30 knots off of Cape Lisburn with waves of 5 to 7 feet. Northeast winds continue up through Wainwright and Utqiagvik, falling off to 20 knots, and then finally become more easterly to 10 knots there at Kaktovik. Now for Thursday, we have west winds to 20 knots, Kaktovik waves 4 or 5 feet. North winds, north-northeast winds 20 knots from Prudhoe Bay and more northeasterly as you go down along the coast from Utqiagvik through Wainwright, Point Lake, and Cape Lisburn. Northeast winds to 20 knots, waves 4 or so feet, but as much as 6-7 feet off the Cape Lisburn and Point Hope. Lower Chukchi Sea, including through the Bering Strait. Northeast winds of 15 knots on Thursday, waves 3 to 4 feet, but could be as high as 5-6 feet on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, especially toward Gamble, where winds will be northeasterly on Thursday at 25 knots.